Humanity has been bestowed with great gifts. Perhaps greatest of all is our imagination, because ultimately it's our imaginations that enable us to shape the world around us. The most obvious examples of that are the great buildings and architecture all around us. But which works of architecture should we see during our lifetimes? Find out in Top 10, The Art of Architecture. Buildings designed in an obviously playful manner are seldom constructed only for decorative purposes. Far from it. As we will find out, functionality has an important role in exceptional architecture. As we visit 10 unorthodox designs located all over the world, we will see, among others, churches, office buildings, a hotel, and several residential buildings. Our journey starts at the end of the 16th century and takes us up to the present day. St. Basil's Cathedral, Moscow, Russia. For the first in our Playful Designs Top 10, we head to Moscow, capital of Mother Russia, the world's largest country. Near the Kremlin in Red Square, here is a vast complex of buildings, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and incorporates one of the absolute pearls of Russian architecture, St. Basil's Cathedral. Legend has it that Basil was both holy man and vagabond, gifted with the ability to foretell the future. He was buried with honors in 1552 in the cemetery of the Temple of the Holy Trinity. Basil died the same year in which the Russian Tsar, Ivan the Terrible, expelled the Tatars from Kazan. St. Basil's Cathedral's complex of 9 churches paid tribute to 9 days of fierce battles and eventual victory against the Tatars.
It almost refers to the history of Russia, you know, as some kind of bridge or divider. Perhaps at the time was a bridge because the empire was which is spanning the continents and cultures and so on.
The original facade from 1561 was brilliant white to match the color of the imperial palace, the Kremlin. The domes on top glittered with gold. It was obviously intended to make an impression. St. Basil's Cathedral has survived many fires, the turbulent history of Imperial Russia, and the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviets very much had their own ideas about how to demonstrate grandeur and power. St. Basil's Cathedral was of another era, and dictator and tyrant Joseph Stalin wanted it destroyed. Apparently, the cathedral drew too much attention during military parades in Red Square. The architect and restorer, Peter Baranovsky, was even sent to prison for 5 years. Then World War II began, and the demolition plans were forgotten. Without Baranovsky, Red Square, and indeed Moscow, would have lost one of its great icons. Sagrada Familia, Barcelona, Spain. Beautiful Barcelona, capital of Catalonia and second largest city in all of Spain. There are many reasons to visit this stunning city by the shores of the Mediterranean. But whatever else they come for, barely anyone misses the chance to see the Basilica Sagrada Familia. There are nearly 200 Roman Catholic churches in Barcelona, but Sagrada Familia is the star. An estimated 3 million people a year come to see this, the greatest work of an artist and architect, Antonio Gaudi. Construction began in 1882, but Gaudi took over a year later with his own very distinctive style. The Sagrada Familia is an original and timeless work of art with elements of Gothic, Art Nouveau and Moorish architecture, which, mixed together, might all be summed up as Catalan modernism. The Sagrada Familia, or Holy Family, was always intended to look up to God towards the heavens. "My client is not in a hurry," noted Gaudi. The headstrong visionary dedicated 43 years of his life to this work, and it still wasn't finished on his death. Gaudi's approach to architecture often favored inspired sketches over accurate scale drawings. He intended the Sagrada Familia to be the last great shrine of Christianity, and the cathedral is rich in Christian symbolism. And it's also impressive in terms of sheer scale.
La Sagrada tiene unas dimensiones en
Sagrada
plantas
Familia
similares a la
has
Catedral
a
de
floor
Mallorca,
area
Catedral de
similar to the
Colonia.
cathedrals in Palma de
Esqueletos.
Mallorca and Cologne. But once the main
Pero la
tower
altura
is
de la
finished,
torre
it
central,
will be at
172 metros y medio, será
172.5 meters, Europe's
de
tallest.
catedrales la más alta de Europa.
In all, there are 18 towers representing the 12 apostles, 4 evangelists, the Virgin Mary, and highest of all, Jesus Christ. And still the work continues. One day, the towers will be finished with sculptures depicting the Bull of St. Luke, the Angel of St. Matthew, the Eagle of St. John, the Lion of St. Mark, and so on. The central tower of Jesus Christ will be decorated with a gigantic cross, making the completed basilica the highest sacred building in the world. Gaudi wanted the finished cathedral to have 3 monumental facades representing the Nativity, Passion, and Resurrection. Each facade was to have its own 4 towers. In 1935, when the building works were interrupted, only the eastern facade had been finished, the Nativity. Atop of its towers are various geometrical shapes. Gaudi was almost certainly influenced by Cubism. A brand new facade representing Christ's Passion was recently built, but in some places it doesn't seem to quite fit with Gaudi's grand designs. This has sparked often heated debate about whether the basilica should be finished at all. One side claims that adding new sections is like attaching new arms to the Venus de Milo. The other sees its completion as essential.
Las catedrales no se acaban nunca. El
Cathedrals
principal
are
será
never finished. We'll still have to
toda
work on the
la
artistic
expresión
elements on the
artística,
glory
simbólica
facade.
de la fachada de la
It's
gloria.
very difficult to predict,
Es muy
but it
difícil
could be
hacer
finished
una
by
previsión. Podría hasta
2030,
estar
2032,
acabada alrededor
even
del
2035.
2030, 2032, 2035.
It's worth remembering that in his own lifetime, Gaudi only saw completion of the facade depicting the Nativity, with its 3 portals, belfry and crypt. Indeed, in 1926, the crypt became his final resting place. However, it looks like the Sagrada Familia will eventually be finished. with the aid of computer models and money from private donors. Completion of the basilica is planned for 2026, the 100th anniversary of Antonio Gaudi's death. Watch this space. Atomium, Brussels, Belgium. The next building is arguably the most eccentric in our top 10 of Playful design. The image of the atomium in the Belgian capital of Brussels is well known around the world. The atomium consists of 9 spheres connected by 20 tubes, a replica of an elementary iron crystal, only enlarged a mere 165 billion times. The spheres represent the individual iron atoms, and the tubes the bonds between the atoms.
Aluminium wasn't actually normally used as cladding material for facades, so perhaps that could be considered as a pioneering act.
The atomium stands on just one of its corners, the steel-clad structure supported by 3 bipedal pillars, built with enough flexibility to withstand the strongest of winds. The atomium was designed by a Belgian engineer named André Waterkijn. Its initial use was as a main pavilion and icon of the World Fair of Brussels in 1958, commonly known as Expo 58.
The aim of the exhibition, King Baudouin said, was to revive the atmosphere of collaboration and peace.
Atomium is, of course, anchored in its time. That was the period of enormous optimism after the war, also the belief that nuclear energy would become a savior of the planet.
Shortly before, Brussels had become the main seat of what would later become the European Union. At the time, there was widespread belief that science could solve all the world's problems and help to maintain peace. Although the original intention was that it should be dismantled after the 1958 World Fair, the atomium has since become one of the symbols of Brussels. In the 1990s, the atomium was threatened with demolition, but fortunately was renovated by Connex architects. Since then, it has also served as a museum, housing permanent collections and temporary exhibitions.
It's a building not like any other building before, so it's clearly iconic.
Inside this astonishing building, visitors can actually wander through the tubes and enter 5 of the 9 spheres. From the only sphere that touches the ground, there's an elevator to the uppermost sphere. This houses a restaurant and viewing platform with a unique panorama over Brussels. Another sphere, the so-called Kids Sphere, is devoted to primary school groups who are even able to spend a night in the building. From the Kids Sphere, at a height of 62 meters, you can see 5 of the other spheres at close range, with the skyline of Brussels as backdrop. This futuristic, almost sci-fi building, which is halfway between sculpture and architecture, is truly one of its kind. Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum New York City, USA. Among the playful designs featured in this episode, we simply can't ignore the work of preeminent American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Located on Fifth Avenue, facing Central Park, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York is one of New York's must-see works of architecture. Solomon R. Guggenheim was an American businessman and philanthropist from a wealthy mining family. In 1939, he opened the Museum of Non-Objective Painting on this very site, the first of the 3 world-class museums opened by the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation.
Of course, it's an amazing building, but in terms of interaction with public space, I think it's a compromise had to be made, you know.
The museum was initially housed in rented quarters. Then in 1943, Guggenheim and museum director Hilaire Bay commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design a permanent building. Wright, already 76 years old at the time, was asked to design an art museum that would showcase abstract paintings as never before. So, without the aid of computers, but with the still quite new technology of reinforced concrete, he designed a landmark work of 20th century architecture, one that held up a mirror to its times.
They really reflect time and atmosphere and moods of people.
Post-war shortages and inflation, as well as the death of Solomon R. Guggenheim himself, delayed construction, which finally began in 1956. The museum opened 3 years later, 6 months after the death of Frank Lloyd Wright. Outside, the museum appears as a stack of cylinders, wider at the top than at the bottom. It is comprised mainly of curved surfaces. This is a rare sight among Manhattan's largely rectangular buildings. Inside, a large spiral ramp surrounds the atrium and gently rises from ground level to the domed skylight. Wright's plan was that visitors to the museum would take an elevator to the top and then view the artworks as they walked down the spiral gallery. Another of Wright's unfinished plans had been for a tower that would host artists' studios and apartments alongside the museum. This design never saw the light of day, but a smaller tower was built later. This too was replaced by the current tower, designed by the architects Gorthmy, Siegel and Associates for the 1992 expansion and renovation. As a monument to modernism, Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum has served as inspiration for the many architects who have followed in his wake. Indeed, the American Institute of Architects honored Wright as the greatest American architect of all time. In 2015, the United States nominated a group of his buildings, including the Guggenheim, to the UNESCO World Heritage List. Wasserhaus, Wien, Austria. The Wasserhaus in Vienna, Austria, is a colorful block of flats covered in greenery. Indeed, plants and trees are given pride of place in its design. The brick house was not designed by an architect per se, but by a painter. And a truly eccentric painter at that. Since the 1950s, the famous Austrian artist Friedensreich Hudenwasser had begun to focus more and more on architecture. As he was always what would be called today an environmentalist, the renowned painter wanted to bring nature closer to people.
Hudenwasser was, of course, a painter, and you can see it, because he doesn't have this kind of well-behaving agenda of architects. You know, he doesn't give a damn about style. It's about emotions.
In 1977, when asked by the mayor of Vienna to design a social housing project, he managed to convince the municipal authority that a house for human beings and trees was just what the city needed. As much as Hudenwasser loved motley colours, he disliked a straight line and uniformity, and it shows. From the outside, the house looks a bit like an upended village. Apartments in different colours and an assortment of window shapes and sizes. The facade is decorated with tiles in a seemingly haphazard arrangement.
It was completely different approach to the architecture, and it's in many ways it's contradictory. You might have a balcony, and that balcony doesn't serve for people being there, but there's a tree growing from the balcony, or the floor. It's almost like earthquake went through the building.
No earthquake so far. Its bulging and brightly coloured columns still stand, and two onion dome turrets still adorn the top of the building. Some of the forested terraces of the house are accessible to all the tenants. Others belong to individual apartments. Inside, the floors and walls of the common areas are deliberately uneven. This is in order to make people truly aware of the surfaces they touch or walk upon. Inside the apartments, the floors and walls are all even and user-friendly. The corridors and stairways are decorated with mosaics. Tiles in the kitchens and bathrooms were laid out unevenly to avoid anything as square as a grid system. The lower parts of the walls were left for children of all ages to draw on. Now and then, they whitewash them and start afresh. Hudenwasser's penchant for uneven floors is also apparent at street level, where trees grow from the bulging pavement. A brick and tile fountain stands in front of the entrance.
I have to admit that it's actually a building full of joy.
This imaginative and quirky house was intended to be in harmony with nature. It was also the beginning of a line of Hudenwasser designs, ranging from an incineration plant to a kindergarten and, not least, a set of public toilets in New Zealand. So far, we have looked at buildings designed by widely celebrated architects such as Frank Lloyd Wright and Antonio Gaudi, as well as architects who are world famous in their own countries. Now our journey continues across the globe, taking in some extraordinary playful designs in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and the US. This will incorporate a rotating house, an office building by world-famous architect Zaha Hadid, and a luxury hotel built in the shape of a billowing sail. Burj Al Arab, Dubai, UAE. Skyscrapers are both symbols of prosperity and physical manifestations of ambition. But just building higher and higher is no longer enough for today's superstar architects want to astonish us with their unique designs. In the United Arab Emirates, Burj Al Arab, a hotel in the shape of a billowing sail just offshore from Dubai, set a new benchmark back in the 90s.
A lot of architects would jump at the chance to design the highest or biggest, or I don't know, the building. And of course, it's here is the architecture completely in service to, perhaps one can call it, politics.
The super luxury hotel was designed back in 1993 by the British architect Tom Wright, working for Atkins, one of the world's largest design companies. Also responsible for the design and construction of the adjacent Jumeirah Beach Resort. All part of Dubai's efforts in the 90s to diversify from an oil-reliant economy and make Dubai a magnet for high-end tourism. The design of the hotel fuses together two elements authentic to the region. One is the shape of a sail, as seen on a dhow, a sailboat long used on the waves of the Red Sea. The other, a traditional Iranian wind tower. These ancient towers provided natural ventilation in buildings by directing wind downwards, but there were practical considerations too.
You have a lot of factors to be considered, and geological conditions must allow that. And of course, if you have a lot of money, even if the geology it's relatively hostile, you can do it. So you anchor the building maybe 50, 60 meters deep in the bedrock or sand.
These design elements create a building such as was never seen before. The two wings of hotel suites from a giant V with a triangular atrium between them. The wings meet at a structural core of the hotel. A steel exoskeleton with three giant trusses braces the whole structure. The most striking feature is, of course, the sail. By day, dazzling white. At night, it displays a spectacular array of colors hinting at the marvels inside the hotel. Behind the sail is the 182-meter tall atrium, for a good while the highest atrium in the entire world. The interior of the hotel is incredibly lavish, with custom-made carpets and rugs, rare marble, and nearly 2,000 square meters of 24-karat gold leaf.
I always like to say it's a piece of art. It's a sculpture. It's something that is very well designed, something for the eye to behold. And I think it invokes emotions in people.
In the atrium, the ostentatious decor is completed by a central fountain where water dances in sudden jets rising over 40 meters into the air. Guests can arrive by helicopter thanks to the helipad, which sits at the top of the sail, or they can take the slender causeway connecting the island with the mainland. In any case, their destination is a luxurious hotel which has dominated the Dubai coastline and skyline for over 15 years. The Gherkin, London, UK. The gherkin, the cheese grater, the shard, and the walkie-talkie. These might seem like clues from a whodunit mystery, but actually they're all nicknames for one of the most recent additions to the skyline of London. Let's stick with the gherkin, for clarity's sake. At the turn of the century, it was first in a wave of high-rise buildings in London's financial district, the City. Officially called 30 St. Mary Axe, the gherkin was designed in 1997 by renowned British architect Norman Foster, awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize a few years later. The building is wrapped around a circular core of steel with a diagonally interlocking grid on the outside. This framework of steel beams spiraling upwards is a distinctive feature of a highly distinctive building.
If you look homogeneity of cities, that's what we find pleasant. Of course, we have cathedrals, and it's a cathedral of our time, you know, it's like cathedral of commerce.
The aerodynamic building is a terrific feat of both design and engineering. Rising from its circular base, the building widens in profile, then slowly tapers again towards its apex. In this way, it appears less bulky than the standard rectangular block of the same volume, and creates more public space at street level. In addition, its design reduces the building's wind load. The diagrid adds vertical support to each floor, creating a column-free interior office space. Clad completely in glass, the 6 darker spirals visible on the gherkin's facade are actually light wells, passing through every floor of the building. Each floor is rotated 5 degrees from the one below it, allowing daylight to flood through the building and increasing the airflow inside. The facade is double glazed, so that heat gain dissipates in the space between the 2 layers. Now, while you might expect glass panes on a rounded building to be curved, there's actually only one piece of glass that isn't flat. That's the dome-like lens at the top. As to be expected, the summit offers a jaw-dropping view over the British capital.
Technology enables us to blow up everything completely out of, even out of proportions. So I think this kind of, I call it the edifice complex.
Edifice complex or not, since opening in 2004, the building has received many awards, even though other distinctive skyscrapers have been built in the city since. The gherkin holds firm as an emblem of modern-day London. And it still looks suitable for display as a 3D installation in an art gallery, space permitting, of course. Sharifi Khan, Tehran, Iran. One of the newest additions to top 10 playful designs of the world is the 2013 Sharifi Ha house in the Iranian capital of Tehran. This luxurious 7-story private residence by Iranian architect Alizira Tagaboni has many interesting features. Most notably, its rotating rooms which can project outwards or stay hidden inside. The turning mechanism itself is based on the same principle that is employed in theatrical revolving stages, for instance. or even turntables at auto exhibitions. But the whole system is mechanized and computer operated. Push the button and the revolving box slowly turns into position. As the box turns, a folding screen made of glass panes locks into place as a railing for the newly created terrace. An airlock system means the rooms can be hermetically sealed. The many amenities of this exceptional house include a swimming pool in the second basement. Like the gymnasium above, it is illuminated by natural light.
I think it's a definitely interesting contribution to this, which is not really a universal recipe. You know, you can't have streets with the buildings constantly rotating and so on, but it brings a new dynamic into the architecture.
The central part of the house serves as an atrium. When the boxes are closed in winter, this allows natural light to enter the building. As parts of the house are movable, the supporting structure had to be carefully planned for all possible configurations of the turning boxes to prevent structural wear and tear. The end result of all this innovation is an ingenious, customizable house which adapts to the needs of its inhabitants. And who knows? Perhaps in the future, every new house will incorporate this kind of spatial transformation. Galaxy Soho, Beijing, China. The most prevalent architectural styles of Beijing are the 1, traditional imperial style, as seen in the Forbidden City, 2, the communist-era Sino-Soviet style, and last but not least, 3, an ultra-modern corporate style. The latter is typified by so-called Starchitect buildings such as Galaxy Soho by the world-famous architect Zaha Hadid. The popularity of the architect, who died in 2015, shows no sign of fading. In her lifetime, she received many awards and was something of a media darling. Zaha Hadid's buildings have become contemporary heritage pieces.
The forms are very exclusive. Of course, they somehow address Chinese aesthetics, because in China, people don't like right angles or sharp corners and so on.
The Galaxy Soho project in the Chinese capital was built for major development company Soho China. This 330,000 square meter office, retail and entertainment complex is a combination of 5 different modules, all linked by elongated bridges. These modules adapt to each other in all sorts of ways, generating a spectacular piece of architecture without sharp corners or abrupt transitions. The design responds to the varied contextual relationships and dynamic conditions of Beijing, Zaha Hadid said about Galaxy Soho.
It's like an urban topography that was a building up of the layers of the city that create these organic forms that are responding to the conditions of the city. And I think that's what's really exciting.
There are 18 floors in total, including 3 below ground level, with shopping on the lower levels, offices from floors 4 to 15, plus restaurants and bars in the upper reaches. The exterior of the building is clad in aluminium and stone, while the interior incorporates a canny mixture of glass, terrazzo, stainless steel, and glass-reinforced gypsum.
That specific nature of materials used. Of course, they are plastic, like the plasticity, it's very high. There is some attention paid to the public space as well. But I can't imagine a building like this coming into the existence in the Western country.
Galaxy Soho House is centre of retail and entertainment, open to the public. But it's also a place where hard-working Chinese entrepreneurs go about their business in offices of undeniable cool. All the working parts of the Galaxy Soho building are interconnected by interiors linked with the city, ensuring its status as a major urban landmark, even for Beijing. WTC Transportation Hub, New York City, USA. A daring and highly impressive design rose up in the wounded heart of New York in place of the former skyscrapers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. There had been a subway station on the site of the present-day hub since 1909. It was modernized during the building of the famous Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in 1971, but of course, put out of action by the attacks of September 11, 2001. The new WTC hub is an important monument, one that reminds New Yorkers of brothers and sisters who passed away. Architect of the WTC Transportation Hub, the most expensive hub in the world, is the visionary Santiago Calatrava. This renowned Spanish designer had a daunting task ahead of him, but it was one he embraced.
The city has a tradition of, by making functional buildings, making also monuments. What we want to fit, what we want to do with our station is to fit in this tradition, to enter in the tradition of the city of creating great civic monuments.
Calatrava's initial conception began with the image of a bird being released from a child's hand in 2004. A single hallway cost $225 million and was billed as the world's most expensive hallway. Finally opened in 2016, its final budget of $2 billion had climbed to $3.9 billion. This led some to claim the hub is a symbol of excess and overspending. But what price is greatness? The WTC Transportation Hub is a fascinating building where form and function combine. Opening in March 2016, the WTC Hub links 11 subway lines and serves 250,000 passengers a day. It is a focal point of the entire Lower Manhattan district, so its build was never going to be easy or cheap.
This is the real anchor and the real motor who will help to the community around and to the whole Lower Manhattan to become this what it used to be, or even, we hope, even better.
The building, which is nicknamed Oculus by its designer, also draws visitors from all over the world. Hardly surprising, the main departures hall has a monumentality that can be found in some religious buildings. Mighty beams of white steel filled with glass stretch towards the New York sky. Stairs of Italian marble are astonishing to behold, as was their cost. And yet, enter from the east with the morning sun on your back. It's a transporting moment in more ways than one. The impressiveness of the Oculus is in no way diminished by its imaginary wings being of unequal length, or by the fact that some cynical New Yorkers have taken to calling it the carcass.
This is a monument. This is a monument to the memory of the brothers and sisters who passed away.
The WTC Transportation Hub is a symbol of today's Lower Manhattan. Its critics bridle at its opulence, but it reflects two sides of New York's history, the tragic and the optimistic. As with all artists, architects and designers want to express their imagination, to see their ideas and visions realized in stone, brick, concrete, steel and glass, or even in trees. Innovative design usually goes hand in hand with functionality. A century has passed from the construction of the Sagrada Familia by Gaudi to WTC Transportation Hub in New York City. Unique and eccentric, all the Playful buildings we have visited still have one thing in common. They all involved out-of-the-box thinking, pushing the boundaries of architecture.